This is like the toughest session because you haven't really had your coffee yet, but you've had the lunch, and then you get my kids do that. So we're going to try not to do that because the whole theme of this conference is shake it up. And we won't shake you because you've just eaten, but we are going to try and keep things moving along. Now, Donna kindly did most of my job because I was going to introduce the panel. Thank you, Donna. That is awesome. I'm just going to go have a nap. Okay, so this afternoon we have a chance to talk to you and share some of the lessons, some of the insights, some of the challenges that have come through in the work that we've been doing. Now, what was interesting when Kirsty and I started on Next Gen, turns out Melbourne Water also had their own internal Next Gen project. So really, it was just worlds aligning, great minds think alike. We now have a branding war underway. So, we'll see how that goes. But what we wanted to take the 35 minutes that we have today is to share with you some of the insights that have come through our work together over the past while, and also Melbourne Water's deep insights into community engagement through their strategic focus on that work. I live in Carlton in Melbourne, or I lived, I should say. I still haven't gotten over the fact that I now live in Canberra. I lived in Melbourne, so I was exposed to Melbourne Water in the coal face, and I almost liked you guys before I actually worked with you, so this is good. You can add me to the list later. So what we want to talk about this afternoon is a bit thinking about community ownership, community involvement, engagement. What do we know, and what can we share, and also how can we take different perspectives to these issues to really start to dig down into them? One of the things I love about IAP2 is it gives us a chance as practitioners to ask really tough questions, to really dig beneath the surface. So we're going to encourage you to do that today. I think all 4 of these panelists are very brave individuals. They are very robust individuals, and I'm going to encourage you to ask them tough questions. We also want to really connect to your ideas. So it's often the case that we start a panel session and we're talking at you, and I think where we're trying to shake it up, and we're at a conference about participation, what I prefer to do is to start with getting you thinking about your own experiences and perspectives. We do have limited time, so we'll do that rather quickly. But at your tables, you've got some brightly colored paper, because we know as facilitators that brightly colored paper makes you excited. Are you all really excited? Because look, it's neon. What are the top 3 things that you know, or think, or feel about community engagement, ownership, involvement, and understanding that you think others should know? What is it that you would share? What are the things you think others should know? Let's start there, and then we'll tell you what we think we know.
I'm someone, that's that's the bit in our business often to see add on.
And my thing that I've been told about it has to be something that's can be done, and by doing that, you're just bring your business to this level. It's getting hard to do something.
transformative stuff, I guess, of the project, not necessarily digging trenches.
So it's a rapid fire exercise. You've got 1 more minute.
Yeah, as well. And I think it has life. We've got 2 timings everywhere. That's what it is.
Okay, so time is up there. It was so quick. I really like that people just said, oh Jesus, like we're not done yet. Good. It's good that you're not done, but we're glad that you got started and that you were talking. So we are going to collect these afterwards and we'll think about them and maybe report back. But very quickly, what's one thing we should definitely know? Oh, it's telling me our time is definitely up. What's one thing that we should know that you really think others should know? A burning thing you really think others should know? Yes.
I think for me the crucial thing that people's stories matter. So if people want to talk, be heard, let them speak.
Thank you. People's stories matter. We got a place for 2 more now. Yes.
Sometimes communities just don't care.
Sometimes they just don't care. we are people. Thank you. That was such an honest response. One more thing that you wish others knew. Yes.
Responsibility with project outcomes can be shared, and so the project has a life of its own when you leave. So when you build that school, you can actually lead the way and you have transformed it because there are people who have a stake in it and you help build that. And that's how we can transform.
Thank you. I love it. We just move through the spectrum of people want to talk and be heard to they don't care to this can be transformative. And that is why I will be working in community engagement the rest of my career. I've asked the panelists today to do something very challenging. You just had to do a challenging thing of thinking about what you would want others to know about your practice in a very short space of time. These individuals are now going to share with us from their own perspectives in only 3 minutes. They're going to give you their pitch about why we should care about community ownership, involvement, and understanding. And Donna kindly introduced our panelists before, but just to be clear, we've got 2 members of the Melbourne Water team, and they have their own Next Gen, and then we've got the Next Gen team. So we're going to start this afternoon. Gentlemen first. No, I'm sorry, Alicia, you're going first. Yes, well, I should have referred to my notes. Alicia Pickering, who is Melbourne Water's lead for strategic engagement. Alicia, you got 3 minutes.
Okay, well, I'm going to do this in under 3 minutes. That's my pitch and promise to you. And by the end of the session, you'll probably see a Next Gen because we've got these competing programs. So my pitch is looking at how we look at, so we talk about understanding, acceptance, community, ownership. And to me, we're at the IAP2 conference, so to me that is beautifully aligned to the IAP2 spectrum, where as you move people from information consulting them to actually getting them to understand, to accept and to be involved in the project. From a Melbourne Water perspective, we look at a whole of organisation, whole of systems life cycle approach to the way in which we do our Next Gen project, but also how we do engagement. And so that is looking at that sort of section from involved to empowering spectrum and making sure that we really consider the community in the planning and strategy stages of the project and our work. So that's a lot of our strategies actually been doing that. And the way we do that is creating more and greater opportunities for the community to be involved in the planning stage through much more collaborative processes, so co-design, placemaking, so that we truly understand the visions and the values of the community before we even get down to the delivery stage, because that's how we get a whole of life cycle approach. So that actually gives us social license. So we've often, and like many organisations, we go transactionally, we go project-wise, and our transformative change is that we look at it all the way through. So we now look at our business as usual land approach and looking at how do we create placemaking here? How do we work with the community around the whole space, not just go in and take the trees out. Not just go, oh, hey, we're coming in now in Carlton because we have a major project infrastructure. So our focus is very much at that, really increasing the involvement and being really clear about the getting the community really involved at that planning, so that as Michael and his team, and Michael's been talking, go into the project delivery, we have much greater acceptance for what we do, and we're working together in partnership. That's my pitch.
Well done. Let's give Alicia a round of applause. 2 minutes and 24 seconds. All right. Michael Bermingham is Melbourne Water's major projects community engagement team leader. And now over to you for your pitch.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, and as Alicia said, I guess look, I'm going to give you my pitch from the perspective of project delivery. And if we go straight to the end goal, what are we trying to achieve out of community ownership, involvement, and understanding, as Alicia said, is essentially respect and acceptance for the work that we're delivering. So my team, we operate on the basis of 3 guiding principles in the way we deliver engagement across our works. Firstly is involving people in the decisions that actually impact them. So what does that mean? Well, it means early engagement, early planning, where we actually have scope to actually influence some of the key decision making that could impact the community. And also bringing a voice to the silent majority, which is always the struggle for us, especially in infrastructure delivery. And we do that through a number of different engagement tools and channels. Secondly is transparency in decision making. So once a decision is made, you clearly explain why we actually made that decision. Understanding that in infrastructure there are some non-negotiables, but the key is to actually explain to your community why that decision is non-negotiable, why that decision was actually made. So for an organisation like Melbourne Water, that is actually operating outside of our comfort zone, because it's really drawing up the shutters on a large organisation like Melbourne Water. And thirdly is delivering great customer service. So becoming more accessible as an organisation, being empathetic to the disruption that we are actually causing out there in the community, and accountability in action, so essentially delivering against our promises. So how do you take that to the next level? Because as we know, that you can nail all 3 of those principles and you still might not achieve that acceptance of the project or respect. And why is that? Well, we're currently living in an infrastructure boom at the moment. And look, there is a crap load of work happening out there, and it is messing with our lives at the moment. So I guess what we're focusing on is better coordinating across the organisation, across the sector, and across the broader industry. Now that's a challenge in itself, but when you are able to achieve that, really let people know about it. Let people know how you are coordinating and managing that cumulative impact on that community when you are delivering those works. So if you deliver against those principles and really show that community leadership, that's when you will start, getting respect and acceptance of your works.
2:59.
Oh,
Thanks,
thank
Michael. I mean, if you didn't feel good about yourself before you started this session, now you got something to take away. And if any of you have things that you're taking away as they're speaking and you want to share with others who are not in this room, please remember that you can tweet if you're on Twitter, and we have #ShakeItUp. We're going to shift over to the next gen engagement team now to hear from the research perspective side, and we'll start with our industry director, Kirsty O'Connell.
Thank you. So I'm going to start by being a little bit controversial, and I don't want to argue with you because I love your work. I'm going to argue a tiny bit.
Okay.
And I'm actually going to say that I think although it's really comforting for us, particularly when we're sitting in the project environment, you're in the chair, you're in the hot seat, and you just need to give your boss that bit of comfort that you've got it under control. It is really nice to think about things like negotiables and non-negotiables. It's fantastic to say, I've selected the level at which we are going to engage. And I think eventually we have to call BS on that kind of stuff. Because frankly, if we haven't done the job right, if we haven't actually engaged with our stakeholders, I'm going to say stakeholders, not community, but our stakeholders, so the people who live alongside this stuff, the people who will use the assets we're building in the future, and the people who are paying for it, if we haven't done a good job of understanding their concerns and designing for that, then ultimately it doesn't matter what parameters we want to set around it. If we get it wrong, then we will know through lobbying that we got it wrong. And there are 20 billion odd examples in Australia, $20 billion of examples of projects that are now on blocks because the community framing or the stakeholder framing just wasn't right. So, but here's where I'm going to come back and agree with you. I think where Melbourne has it absolutely on the money is that they're starting with the culture. So I think we have to take a big breath and go into this scary space where we accept that we are not delivering in spite of or for our stakeholders, we are delivering with our stakeholders. And we have to have buy-in from the top. And I think the question that's really telling, if you're talking to the key decision maker, not the head of engagement, but the CEO of your organisation, the chair of your board, the question to ask them is engagement an opportunity or is engagement an obligation? And if they're in the second column, you're in a whole world of hurt. And we've got to move them to the first column. So this is an opportunity. And so to achieve that cultural shift, the kind of changes I'm expecting to see or would want to see, it's not about changing the values on your border and wall, forget that fluff. It's actually about the real meat and potatoes of your business. What's in your PD? What's written in your KPIs? What performance obligations are you writing into your contracts for your contractors in terms of how you expect them to steward these relationships and to regard stakeholder information? It's that kind of tangible change that has to be achieved. However, and here's the link to research, in order to help an organisation make that decision, to give comfort, because we do have to give comfort to those people who are signing the cheque, their blood is really in the sling, we have to be able to say to them that we have made our decision not based on some vague feeling in our waters, but on evidence. And that's where I think projects like the Next Gen Engagement Program are so important. This is about developing an evidence base that informs better decisions and that helps us to achieve the cultural transformation needed for us to deliver $57 trillion worth of infrastructure globally. Because if we don't get better at doing this stuff, we will never deliver what we have to deliver every time that we have to deliver it. That's me.
301, but I give it to you Kirsty. Thank you. Let's finish with the gears. My goodness, we're all awake after lunch now. All right, and Kirsty Jones, who is our research fellow, who is embedded, so co-located with Melbourne Water, because for us in the Next Gen project, and it speaks volumes about the culture at Melbourne Water that they will have us. And I hope you'll still have us. Our work is not about being 3 steps removed. It is about being absolutely in the weeds and understanding day to day what is happening so that we can come up with evidence and tools and solutions that really, really work and can be used and that aren't just going to sit on the shelf. So, Kirsty Jones.
Yeah, so I'm going to come at it from a slightly different perspective, in that as a researcher, the community in which I'm working with, it's actually many of you in this room, it's practitioners and decision makers. And so, as a Next Gen program, we are looking at how we can build that understanding, involvement and ownership of the research in which we're generating. And the reason we're wanting to do that is, as Kirsty was discussing, is that we're looking at how we can support that evidence-informed decision making across the sector. So we're looking at how we can support that research to practice so that evidence can be used to inform policy and practice. And to do that, we need to create research which is applicable, which is relevant to you guys. We need to be answering the questions that need to be answered. We need to be communicating those research questions or the answers to those questions in a way that resonates, in a way that's understood. And if we do that, that's when we build that ownership, and we hope that the research will then be overused and can be used. So I suppose there's 2 guiding principles in which I work on and which the team works on in order to generate that. We're looking at the research process, the whole life cycle, and the opportunities in which we can engage. So from shaping the research agenda, you may have been involved in the pilot phase last year for the programme, looking at the questions that need answering. I'm working on a great project with the team at Melbourne Water at the minute to try and collect and develop a case study database and case studies for infrastructure. The insights I'm able to gain from working with these guides on a day-to-day basis has a really important impact on the types and the nature of the case studies that we're developing. So it's opportunities to engage not just in how you formulate a question, but how you collect data, how you analyse that data, how you report on that data, all shaping it to be something that actually resonates and which is useful and can be used. But the other principle which I think is important is about relationships and about how to build relationships with your partners and the people who might use evidence. And so being co-located is a really unique opportunity to continue to build that so that we get and an open, honest and mutually beneficial relationship with the team there, so that we're building legitimacy for the research that we're generated, but also down the line, once we get those answers, we're also building legitimacy for community engagement within the organisation as a whole. So we're seeing that research that's developed being used in practice, and I think that's where, understanding involvement and ownership it's so important. If we want the research that we're delivering and that we're generating to make that impact and to be useful, then we have to work side by side with the people who are actually wanting to use it. My bitch.
Thank you, Kirsty. And you can two great. So you can see here that we have a few very different perspectives on ownership, understanding, and involvement, and it runs the spectrum from the day-to-day delivery through to corporate strategy, through to how we produce and deliver research. A lot of food for thought here, we hope, and we've got a couple of minutes to open up to your questions, and we love challenging questions, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Otherwise we'll challenge each other.
Yeah, that's right. We have plenty of questions we can ask each other, but we'd love to give you an opportunity. Yes.
Michael, you touched on bringing a voice to the silent majority, those people that are not dying votes, but are maybe neutral or passively in favour. You have time, you have 3 minutes to get their vote. Can you tease that out a little bit for us?
So how we go about, bringing a voice to the silent majority. It's challenging. It's about a lot of this comes down to spending the time to develop relationships with the people that live in the area. So not just that really vocal group that are always the first people to pop up in a project, but actually taking the time to get out there, work with the community, and get a feeling from the rest of the community on their thoughts, their values to that certain area. So social media has been a really powerful way of doing that, and I know from our perspective, we've been using social media, sponsored social media posts to try and generate some of that conversation. We've also been using online engagement. So the social media post would then move that person into an online engagement portal where they can either, we might use Social Pinpoint as an example, where they can start putting down their values to a certain area so that we can then start encapsulating that as part of the project delivery. We've also used videos as well, where we interviewed community members to give their thoughts on either the area that we're working in or the project itself. So it's all about generating that conversation so that we can get more and more opinions around our works.
That's one. Yep, we'll take one final question here. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Well, you can make it a really complex, compound question.
Hello.
Ooh, that's
So, in terms of the work that you guys did, I guess I'm interested to know what the problem, the issue was in the beginning. Was there some kind of benchmark that you guys set in terms of research across your own organisation to understand where people were at, and moving them from that position to a better place in terms of their understanding of the importance of engagement?
So, from an organisational cultural transformation perspective, I'll talk on that. Maybe you could talk on some of those examples that really pushed us into change. I would suggest that probably our board and leadership team, we talked about the importance of having a leadership-led or championed program, had the foresight through a whole range of, we do environment scans every year to see what the big shifts are in societal shifts, and they, back in 2014, 2013, could see that community needed a greater, communities was mobilising via social media, more opposition to works that were going on. We could really see that societal shift around the need for community to be part of decision making and not just this decide, defend, decide, promote. And our board went, we need to be, given our role, Melbourne's role in the community, we need to be a leader in this, and we want a whole organisation, we want community decision making to be a part of every part of the organisation. And we were often, like many organisations, dealing with the problems, so where we were having risks and issues, so we were putting a lot of issue in major project delivery because that was often where the issues were, and And we were doing really well at how do we work harder to engage the community there, but the decisions were already made. The decisions had been made long ago. What we were doing is managing the impact of those decisions. And so what we did really hard through the Next Gen project, and a number of the Next Gen team are in here today, is work out how we actually culturally shift the organisation. So build capability around, and we talk about capability, but we're talking strategic planning for complex issues, because this is what it is. It really sits with our planners, our project initiators. They're doing urban, we talked about land use planning. They really needed to understand what that was all about, how we actually involved the community in decision making at that point. And that was what my team and the Next Gen team and we all started to look at. And then we started to look at, well then, how do we involve the community at delivery, and how do we have best practice guides to make sure that when we do our works that we're doing it in concept. And actually that gives us I call almost a whole system life cycle to community involvement, ownership, involvement and acceptance. And so suddenly, instead of just going and dealing with, so we had an example, I think Nicola's in the room, where we were going and we had a community opposition around some tree removal, I'm talking among Michael's projects, and when we unpacked it, we'd actually also been in there, and we'd also been working with the Friends group and had done an amazing amount of work in that area, but that community that was opposing our works didn't understand that. So we didn't have this whole of organisation view of our works. We didn't have the social life and really the great work we were doing throughout that whole community. It was a harder story to tell when we were doing it really transactionally. So our board had the foresight 3 years ago through this project, and we're really proud of the work we've done, and I think that evidence at that shift has put us in a really good position. The Essential Services Commission has, people who have worked in Victoria, they've got engagement now as a key plank of the primo model. We have to, the energy and water sector have to actually do around pricing. So energy is something that everyone has to attend to really, engagement has to address, and we're already in the position now where we're going into that process because of that work we've done.
Thank you. It's a terrific question. I'm conscious of time. Just to give you a very quick research-specific answer, in the instance of us working with Melbourne Water, because of what Alicia just described, they had already done a lot of this benchmarking and cultural change work, and so we came in as researchers at a different point. But we work with organisations on a project-by-project basis. The nice thing about Next Gen, though, is that we have sector-wide buy-in, and so you have an opportunity to work in partnership with other organisations from government, civil society, or similar sectors within your industry. So each one will have a different entry point in terms of research, but the reason that Kirsty and I met each other, I should say Kirsty O'Connell because we have 2 Kirstys on the team. Kirsty O'Connell and I met each other, almost 4 years ago now? Yeah, it's a long time, because she needed a baseline assessment for engagement work that she was doing for the Inland Rail project at that stage. So thank you all for your time, for your attention, for your excellent questions. We really encourage you to keep the conversation going, and here's a couple of ways that you can do that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Donna. Thanks for that very warm welcome. I guess I wanted to probably just start by making a reflection on the way I look at engagement, public advocacy, I guess what the contribution into social licence is. And there's one person in the room who will know what I'm talking about, but I'm not going to identify the organisation I worked for at the time. But I remember very clearly sitting in meetings and discussions with senior executives and talking about our strategic approach to engaging with the media, engaging with stakeholders, the government, regulators, public, whoever. And one person piped up and said, look, it's very simple. We're like the humpback whale. If you don't surface, then you don't get harpooned. And then I think there was some clever 25-year-old sort of chirped up and said, yeah, but if you don't surface, don't you suffocate? And I guess that really sort of, nailed it for me in relation to the importance of engaging publicly with all of your various different stakeholders. I'm not, as I say, I'm going to name the organisation, but in the few years that I worked there was, I guess, a real strategic mindset change to try and drive much more public engagement. And I guess that's what we're all about here in this room, is to try and drive some of that public engagement. And to what end, to what purpose? Well, for me, it's about social licence. So before I go into the presentation, and I'm on a time clock here, so I've done a dry run and a practice, and I went well over yesterday afternoon, so I'm sure I'll try and keep it as punchy and as succinct as possible. But put your hand up if you've ever done a safety share. So I've worked in a few different organisations where basically every meeting starts with a safety share, and safety is embedded into everything that happens in the business, in the organisation, usually in operational style organisations. And I'm sure the people responsible for safety track all the data, they look at the data, they look for lead indicators, they understand where the next possible amber or red light sort of situation, red flag type situation is emerging from, because they might have a near miss or whatever it is. And I guess, if we're to be really serious about how important the social licence piece is for all of the various different businesses, organisations, companies that we work for, then we should be aspiring to the same sort of golden thread of safety that runs through everything that businesses do, that we should have that same presence for public engagement and the community relations aspect. So I'll open with those few remarks just so you sort of have a bit of a feel for what I'm about and what I view those those responsibilities as being. We've got a fair bit of technology here. I realise it's the afternoon session and I'm probably not as exciting, as entertaining as the panel, and listening to me drone on the whole time could seriously put you to sleep. So we do have the assistance of a fly-through and an interactive, sort of interactive presentation for you. And I'll, as I say, try and get through as much of it as I possibly can so there's some time for questions at the end. So really just want to start with this image. This is the Maryborough Bridge in Brisbane, and it turned 40 this year. And people might be thinking, well, okay, why are you putting that sort of historical image up there? And it's nothing to do with the fact that the characters there are not wearing high vis and they've got no sun protection on. What it's about is one of a very clever member of my team went and did some research on this and discovered that the community of Brisbane, southeast Queensland, first started talking about building the Maryborough Bridge in 1889, and it was finally delivered, commissioned and went into operation in 1978. Now I'm not fantastic at maths, but by my calculation that's about a 90-year gestation period for the project. And I suppose I put this up there as an example of historical relevance for what we're about, because one of the key probably stumbling blocks, or at least one of the things that stopped the bridge from proceeding earlier, was that there was a community backlash against the construction of this bridge back in 1889. And who led the charge? It was the merchants of South Brisbane, the shopkeepers, the retailers, the traders, who thought building the bridge with rail capacity and a bridge across the Brisbane River would lead to their businesses being negatively impacted. So a great example of how, if you get it wrong, your project can basically be killed before it even really gets moving. They had another go in 1919, just after World War I, and then finally, some 60 odd years later, as I said, in 1978, the bridge was commissioned and opened and went into operations. And it's a really nice segue into talking about our project, Cross River Rail, because this bridge here is almost at capacity. It's done a great job for the people, for the commuters of southeast Queensland and Brisbane in particular, but it can only take a maximum of 24 trains per hour during the AM peak, and it's already operating at around that 2021 mark. So within a few short years, this bridge physically will not be able to take any more QR trains on it during the AM peak, which means you can't put any more trains on the network, which means people don't get the level of public service that they want. So I thought that was a nice way of starting, a nice historical example of how community engagement and getting that stakeholder engagement right the first time around actually gives you a greater chance of success. And not just us as practitioners, but the project leaders, the owners of the project, the sponsors of the project, and all the various parties that are involved in the project. So I guess how are we doing that in relation to Cross River Rail, or what are we using that as a way forward? Well, and I guess look, none of this is going to be particularly, I suppose, revelatory to any of you in this room, but we're obviously looking for really useful two-way communication, trying to make sure that all those engagements are high value and really giving us as much useful information and really good feel for where the potential advocates, where the potential pockets of resistance might be, and obviously all to the end of achieving social licence for the project. So, you know, from our point of view, Cross-River Rail isn't really just one project, it's a series of really, really big projects adding up to one mega project. And what does that mean really for Queensland's large mega project? Well, I've got this fly-through to give you guys, I guess, all a really good understanding of what the project is all about. So we start here, planet Earth, we drop down into Earth, and bearing in mind that we often use this presentation for various different audiences, and I'm also conscious of the fact that not everyone in the room here is from South East Queensland or from Brisbane, but locating Brisbane as really the sort of central point of South East Queensland, with a lot of really strong growth happening through that northern corridor up into the Sunshine Coast, and of course through the southern corridor down here to the Gold Coast. The population growth in South East Queensland really centred around those fringe areas where you've got those pulsing yellowy orange. They look like sort of bomb targets or something. But what they tell me really is that that's where the South East Queensland Regional Plan models for the highest levels of population growth. That's where people can afford to live. That's where most of the housing development is going to be. So you're talking about in the order of an additional 2 million people over the next 20 odd years in South East Queensland, most of it concentrated in those yellow areas, about 80% of it in total of that 2 million people out there. But where are the jobs? Well, almost half the jobs are in the Brisbane LGA. So what does that mean from a transport and a land use and planning perspective? It means that a lot of those 80% of people who've chosen to buy an affordable house sort of further out from the core of Brisbane are going to need to travel to their place of work on a daily basis, and most of those jobs are going to be in the inner core. So what does that mean for the rail system, which again doesn't necessarily account for as much in the overall stats for commuting as what we'd like it to account for, but the rail system is almost at capacity already. So we talked about the Maryborough Bridge there, and I'll just try and point it out. So it's that little section there. But then Roma Street, Central, Fortitude Valley and Bowen Hills, those 4 stations really constitute the CBD, or not really the CBD, but the main city stations that service the Brisbane CBD, albeit they're a good 15-20 minute walk from the main CBD, but we'll get to that in a minute when we talk about Albert Street. So really at capacity, you've got a system which within a few short years you physically will not be able to put any more trains on it. So that's where Cross-River Rail comes into the equation, and really it's just a grade separation. So what you're talking about really is bypass surgery on the main organ of the network. It really unlocks that bottleneck in the middle and gives you the ability to, instead of run just those 24 trains across the bridge, you can run 48 trains an hour during the AM, PM peak. But if you're going to do that, what's the ideal alignment and where do you build the project to ensure that you get the best land use outcomes? So precinct by precinct, the alignment has sort of really sought to try and maximise those outcomes. So if we just have a look at the complementarity between our project and the Brisbane Metro project, there was, I guess, a period there where there was a lot of discussion about, well, do you really need Cross-River Rail? Wouldn't a Metro be able to do that job? Cross-River Rail and Metro really integrate at 2 key points, Boggo Road and Roma Street, and what Metro is really about is a 2 to 3 minute frequency, whereas Cross-River Rail will give work a sort of 5, 6, 7 minute frequency. So you really will be able to have that turn up and go style public transport for the whole of the Brisbane LGA, but also the benefits from our project in particular are highest the further you get away. So does that sound a bit confusing? So the 10 kilometre corridor there and then the 6 kilometres of it, which is tunnel, the highest beneficiaries are actually people on the Gold Coast and up in those northern growth corridors, because at the moment they're waiting anywhere between 15 20 minutes for a train. If they miss the train, much more likely to jump in the car and drive than they are to stick around and wait 20 minutes for the next train. And if they do get the next train, they may not get a seat because they missed the early train with lower passenger loads. So you're able to put double the number of trains through the centre of the city. That means you're actually able to run a much higher frequency for those longer haul commutes. And that's why the heavy rail system, I guess, does most of that heavy lifting in the long distance journeys. It's really about those sort of 60 to 80 minute journeys in the further outer ring of the region. The heavy rail does the heavy lifting, and then the Brisbane Metro complements it in the inner part. So, look, just not going to really bore you with too much more detail on the project. Here's some of the key stats. $5.4 billion fully funded by the Queensland Government. Probably the only other thing I think really worth pointing out is that section down the bottom, designed to allow 9-car trains. At the moment, QR operates maximum 6-car trains, so we're really future-proofing the design of the infrastructure to ensure that 20, 30, 40 years down the track, QR decides to run 9-car train sets, the stations will be able to cope with that. So this is our lovely fly-through. This is where it gets a little bit more visually stimulating. Hope you're staying with me on this. We're starting at the southern part of our alignment, and we're now at Boggo Road, which is a key health science knowledge precinct. You've got the PA Hospital, and you've also got Sara Eco Sciences, the Translational Research Institute, the TRI, which is where Professor Ian Fraser developed the vaccine for cervical cancer. So a really interesting part, and probably somewhat overlooked part of southeast Queensland, but a real potential engine room for a generator of those high-skilled, high-knowledge jobs that everyone is sort of seeming to covet these days, to ensure that you have one of those globally competitive sectors of your economy. So what's possible down there? And I guess some of this stuff is fully funded, the rail infrastructure, but some of it is really about working with the partners down there to try and invest in that precinct to try and generate some more of those jobs and more of those private sector skin in the game. So without labouring it too much, we're basically funded to build the rail infrastructure, the station box, and one smallish, humble piece of, I guess, pedestrian connectivity between the two precincts. So on the left you'll see part of the precinct there, that's the CSIRO and Translational Research Institute, but over on the right hand side, nicely sliced in half by the rail corridor, you've got the hospital over there with about 8,000-10,000 employees. So connecting those two precincts with something quite game-changing is a real opportunity. So something perhaps like this, a big land bridge, and this mimics what's happened in other health and science precincts across the world. Think of the Mars precinct in Toronto, or the Oslo Health, Science and Knowledge Precinct. So that's really where we're headed in terms of the redevelopment of Boggo Road. Moving along the corridor north, we land at the Gabba. I don't want to spend too much time here because I think you guys will have at least seen or heard a little bit about what the plans are there. Obviously, poor public transport connectivity, but a 45,000 seat stadium right next door, very difficult to get to on game day. And you've got a 6-hectare site nearby, all state-owned land, which we're in the process of demolishing buildings on that right at the moment, delivering a high-capacity rail station right into there. But what does that also give us the opportunity to do? Well, to redevelop the Gabba. So let's just keep moving along. We get into the city, Albert Street, and we'll delve into these with a little more detail as we go along, but Albert Street will become the busiest station in the whole of QR's network. There's not currently a railway station there, and it will quickly become the busiest railway station in the whole of the network. If we keep moving through, it's ideally located there on the peninsula amongst a whole range of destinations that people actually want to get to. So Queen's Wharf development, QUT, all within sort of 5 to 10 minute walking distance. So perfectly located because Roma Street and Central are up on that north and northwestern fringe terribly located to service the CBD. Probably the most exciting of all of our precincts is up here at Roma Street, but very complex. It's probably likely to be ground zero during construction, but eventually be Brisbane's Grand Central, which I think is super exciting, and we will jump into that in a moment. So that gives you, I guess, a look and feel of what the alignment is. But I guess I really want to, I suppose, give you a feel about how we're positioning our project, because it's not the only one that's happening in Brisbane. And I guess from my point of view, context is really everything. That's just a nice side view about Station Box and what may or may not, depending on who wins the contract, end up the public plaza. But our project really is, I guess, transformative in a lot of ways. It integrates back into the QR network, but there's a lot of other stuff happening across Brisbane at the same time. And I want to give you, I guess, a flavour of all of the other various projects, just as we continue finishing off this alignment slide, because Crossriver Rail's been through a few gestations. Going back almost a decade to 2010, you had the EIS, then you had the BAT project, now you've got the current delivery schedule. And rather than, I guess, being well understood and being famous, our project was a little bit infamous because people thought, well, that thing's never going to get off the ground, it's never going to happen. But this is exactly where we're at in the procurement schedule. All of our bids are in for all the major contracts. We're in the evaluation phase, and in the first half of next year we expect to make major contract announcements and do financial close on those projects. And I guess that really gives us a lot of confidence that the 2024 delivery schedule can be met. But there's also, I guess, some key challenges, and that is really to boost the public awareness around the project so that we go from, awareness through to advocacy. A lot of very complex, different stakeholders, from the directly impacted right through to the general public, and a range of other projects that are actually happening at the same time. So as we do award those contracts that I mentioned, we'll certainly be doing those in partnership with the other consortia partners that end up delivering the project itself. The way we're basically set up, and I talked a little bit before about embedding safety into everything we do, well, I guess we've tried to embed the strategy, comms and engagement at the very highest levels of the delivery authority. So I sit on the ELT with the various other ELT members, project director, chief financial officer and so forth, and reporting directly into the CEO to give all of the things that we're responsible for a real sort of primacy in the discussions around the table. And that certainly, I think, means that we can then divide up the division that we're responsible for running as a team, Donna and I. We've got stakeholder engagement, media and comms, which is separate from stakeholder engagement, and then marketing. So in our view, we think we're setting it up for success to ensure that we have the ability to take those key learnings and optimise them from our other peers in Sydney and Melbourne. And I guess, they're a little bit further ahead of us in the procurement schedule and the delivery schedule, but that means that we can take the great things that they're doing and learn from them, but also hopefully avoid some of the areas where they probably would have done things differently. Might just move through, because I do have a little video that I guess I want to show you that I think gives us a real feel for the scale and the real transformation that's happening in Brisbane.
Starry night.
really just came from a scrape of all of those various different projects, websites, what they'd already publicly put out there. But what it's really led to is a much more coordinated effort between ourselves as a delivery authority, and our project alignment pretty much touches or in some way interacts with every single one of those other 10, 12 other major projects happening across the city. It was a really deliberate decision from our perspective to engage really closely with every single one of those projects, because we're all going to impact the community, we're all going to impact each other, we're all going to impact on a whole range of different stakeholders, because I think it's at last count sort of in the order of about $30 billion worth of development and project delivery happening between now and 2025. So we've got a very strong mutual self-interest and a mutual interest amongst the projects to work cooperatively on that. I'd like to leave that slide up there because the local band from Brisbane that we bought the rights to their music to use that as the backing track, but we've played it so many times now in various different audiences that I think they almost should have paid us instead of us paying them. But they're a really cool local band, which is awesome. But I'm going to spend probably just 2 minutes or so zipping through some of the tools that we use, and then we'll open it up for questions. So this is our lovely mobile information booth. I think we've already rolled it out to various different events over the past 4 or 5 months since we took delivery of it. I think we had around 240,000 odd people pass by or engage with us at the Royal Show, the ECA, here in Brisbane back in August. Lovingly referred to by our Chief Financial Officer as the Caravan of Love. But that's really been a useful weapon in our armoury of how we actually engage with people, because we've kitted it out with lots of different VR and options like that that are quite interactive for community members. The kids love it, but even the parents, I find myself with the goggles on that I get a little bit of motion sickness, but anyway, 2 or 3 minutes is enough for me. So some of the other stuff, this is a bit more of the nitty gritty stuff, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, getting out, talking to mayors and CEOs. We had an interesting phase there. I'm sure every one of you in some way has run up against local government, dealt with local government. Local government's been your project donor at some point. We seem to have this amazing capacity to go and meet with a mayor or a CEO, and within a week or two they were arrested on corruption charges. I don't take any responsibility for any of that, but it just seems to be one of those phases that South East Queensland's going through. But anyway, look, we've engaged with a lot of those local government authorities because, as I say, even though we're building our project entirely within the local government area of Brisbane, the benefits certainly spread right out to those local government areas. So what's ahead for us? Well, obviously, we're right into the demolition and early works phase of our project's delivery, which means we've really got to push on with those key stakeholder relationships and make sure they're as healthy and as strong and as long-lasting as we possibly can, because it's a 7-year delivery of this project. It's not like a 2 or 3 or 4 year delivery timeline. It's right through to 2025 for us, so they need to have a fair bit of trust and authenticity in those relationships. And then, of course, next year, contractor startup and mobilisation will be a big focus. Just want to quickly touch on a couple of real-life examples of where we're using what we think reasonably innovative approaches. We're relocating the long-haul coach terminal at Roma Street right now as we speak, because we're demolishing the Brisbane Transit Centre. And I'm still waiting for the community group to spring up in opposition to the demolition of the Brisbane Transit Centre, because it's such a loved building and everyone just thinks that it's such an amazing public space and it's just so welcoming, and everyone just finds that it's really embedded itself in the hearts and minds of Queenslanders.
He's being sarcastic.
So the coach, we're actually planning the celebration party for its demolition. The coach terminal's being relocated, so we've done a round of engagement with some of the local residents up there, using some of that VR, getting up there and doing face-to-face engagement with the citizens in that little precinct, and found that that was a really good way to, I guess, clear the path for the relocation of that coach terminal. So I really want to, I guess, give you a look and feel for what might be possible in that Roma Street precinct. There it is, my favourite building in Brisbane. This is what we're sort of, I guess, aiming at from our contractors, is a big open wide plaza where people can move through that area, and use it as a real hub for all the different modes of transport. And then, of course, there's been a lot of talk about the Brisbane Live proposal because, you know, I'd just love to sit in traffic going to Boondall to see a show again, or get stuck in the car park for another hour and a half after the show, because that just really adds to the experience. It's an amazing user experience. Brisbane Live, the business case has recently been completed by Building Queensland, the independent authority that advises on infrastructure investment for the state, and it will be considered by government over the coming months. A couple of slides to go. Over at Wollongabba, a key construction site. That's a real image, not a render. That shows we're well into the demolition, and we've got a bit of building wrap and going on around the old land centre building. So look, not going to dwell much longer. That's the depth of our stations. Most of them are around that sort of 30 to 35 metres depth, which gives, I guess, you know, a look and feel for what we're planning in some of those areas. Wollongabba, pretty exciting, being able to put pedestrian connectivity from the station right across into the stadium itself and really give the stadium the front door and the proper forecourt that it deserves and that it needs to compete against the interstate stadiums as they improve. So I think I've left probably just enough time for some questions. It was an ambitious ask to get through all of that in 25 minutes, 30 minutes, so we've got a little bit of time for some questions. And just hold it there. Hi.
This is a newfangled thing. Okay, my name's Deanie, I'm from Perth. I spent a lot of my working life in Queensland. As an infrastructure lover, this is the most fantastic project. Are you selling the project to people, or is there any opportunity for people to have input? Are there any negotiables?
So one of the slides I zipped through pretty quickly showed the planning pathway going back to 2010. So there's been a fair bit of public engagement and opportunity for submissions and input over that lengthy, decade-long process. But we've also got final design and alignment to go once we reach a financial position of close with the contractor. So I guess what I'm saying in short is that yes, there'll be other opportunities for the community to engage and have input in the project, because the final design, most of what I showed you, almost everything that I showed you there is the reference design, not the final design that will be built, because that's in the hands of the contractors, the three different consortia that are bidding for the project. So we've got a whole other round of community consultation to go through 2019, and by the end of 20...
Telling people about the project, do they have any opportunity to make any changes to the project?
There will be opportunity, absolutely, for them to comment on and give their feedback on various different elements of the design, and so it will be subject to the Coordinator General's approval. So the answer to your question is yes, but I think reasonably limited in terms of what you're going to change, given that there's been a decade or so of public engagement opportunities.
Hi, Karen from Comic-Con. Just first of all, I'm wondering whether maybe I shouldn't have sold my house in Brisbane earlier this year, because it looks like Brisbane's about to get way more exciting.
Where in Brisbane was it?
Just near Wollongabba.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Look, I'm not a real estate analyst, but...
Please just avoid all that pesky construction over the next little while. But I see the Albert Street station there. Presumably it's going to have to be some demolition of buildings to be able to get that tunnel through.
Yes.
And obviously it's a water table, it's a river city. How are the DLAP surveys going to go on some of those older buildings around Albert Street?
The area, I guess, in which, and it's very tight, the fly-through doesn't necessarily do it complete justice, but it's the most constrained and the tightest of all of our construction areas. So, I mean, you're right, it's tunnelling and it's heavy excavation right in a built-up area of the city. But I mean, I guess, you know, we're using, we are doing those dilapidation surveys, but we're also obviously only dealing with tier one contractors who have a track record of delivering these sorts of projects in heavily urbanised, built-up areas. In the immediate precinct around Albert Street, I don't actually think there are any heritage listed buildings. I'd have to check on that, but most of it is your sort of reasonably newish serviced apartments or high-rise resi stuff or commercial buildings. So I'm pretty sure there aren't any heritage listed buildings, but not right on the station box. But further up at Roma Street, definitely in that public plaza, you might have caught a glimpse of the old heritage listed Federation style station itself. So yeah, definitely there are some heritage issues in the alignment.
I had a quick question. Obviously there's so many different people involved in, different agencies and authorities and organisations, and all of those will have their own stakeholder engagement teams as well, or many of them. And I'm wondering how you're kind of creating alignment across all of the different people who are doing different kinds of engagement programs that will ultimately kind of connect back to Cross River Rail.
Yeah, look, I think it's a really good question because, that little clip that I showed you gives you a sense of all of the various different projects that are happening. They're either proposed, in delivery, or they're coming to the end stages of their delivery. Most of them are actually either in the early stages of delivery or they're only in the proposal stage. So engaging, you can have the best plan that you like. You have the most strategic plan with all the little milestones and all the little actions and everything on it. But I guess what I've learned in my 20-odd year career in various different organisations is that a lot of it comes down to trust and human relationships. And so if you don't have a trusting, authentic relationship with those other organisations, then you better do some work and try and get one, because we all collectively are going to be impacted by each other. And as much as I could run the most integrated, fantastic stakeholder and comms, joint marketing engagement program for this project, if I don't have those other stakeholders from those other projects and also government agencies all reasonably supportive or at least neutral, then I'm at some stage going to run into some choppy waters. So building those relationships at CEO level, at our level as practitioners, but also at the technical level, project directors, those relationships are really what it comes down to. Don will tell you that we pretty much have a rule that we don't treat stakeholders as an organisation. Melbourne Water, they're not a stakeholder. The people who work there make the decisions of the stakeholders, the humans, because it all comes down to those human relationships. So if we look at a matrix or a spreadsheet with a stakeholder listed just as the entity, Brisbane City Council, that's meaningless almost to us, because it's got to be about the human relationship that sits behind that. And really that's the approach that we take. I think we've at last count got about 148 people on our matrix of key stakeholders, and they're all actual people, they're not organisations. And we assign individual relationship owners across the whole of the organisation. I think I was getting a little bit pressed on time when I zipped through that slide, but of the 150 odd key organisations and people within them, every single one of them has a relationship owner within the delivery authority, and that's tracked every week and reported up to the CEO and the board every month.
Just one last question.
Hi, my name's Lee, I'm from Gladstone Regional Council, so I'm new to Queensland, and I just started on a project that was a community hub precinct that was initiated back in 2010. So we've got a very long lead-in time, quite similar I think in our lead-in time. I'm just curious around what challenges you faced with the long lead-in time of engagement and how you've overcome any challenges that have arisen with the length of lead-in time.
I think I can answer your question with one word: scepticism. I think so I came into this role in July last year, and as Donna said in the introduction, I came across from BHP, where I sort of worked in both the Queensland business, the coal business, but also worked in a global comms role as well for BHP. And I knew about this project because it had been talked about for so long, and I'd sort of kept a close watch on it and a close interest on it, mainly because I knew if I was able to go and work on the project, I wouldn't have to get on a plane every week and spend night after night away from my family. But what I guess I realised really quickly back in July when I got there was that there was this latent scepticism about the project because of the long gestation period. And look, that can be a benefit because you can also point to the fact that we've been engaging with the public on this project for almost a decade. So it gives you some capital and some goodwill to the extent that, hey, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that we're going to build a tunnel under the suburb here, or it shouldn't be a surprise to these landholders that we'd be acquiring their land. But it's also led in the saddlebags from the acceptance and advocacy point of view for the wider public, because a lot of them still, I think you would find, look at it and say, well, you know, is it, all I could hear was a couple of different levels of government fighting about the funding and this thing, and really is it really needed, and I don't understand it. And then late QR's recent challenges over the top of that, and you know, we're pushing against a fairly large build-up of scepticism, but you know, we're pretty confident that now physical progress makes a difference, demolition, and just the sheer scale of the project itself. In our social licence journey, pretty confident that within a couple of years' time, we'll have way more levels of awareness, but we'll also be converting some of that awareness to acceptance and advocacy.
Right. Thanks, Matt. I'm sure Matt will probably hang around for afternoon tea, so I know a couple of you still had some questions, so please feel free to grab Matt either in here or out for morning tea. Thank you very much. This is all good. And it's actually Matt's birthday today. So we've got him a special little IAP2 cupcake for his birthday. Shall we sing? Happy